Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Fantasy. This is Battlefield 1. In today's weapon review, we're going to be taking a close look at the M1903 Experimental available to the Scout class in Battlefield 1. As per usual, we're going to be taking a close look at the stats of the weapon, how it performs on the battlefield, where it performs best, and how, of course, you are supposed to use this weapon to get the most out of it on the battlefield. With all that being said, however, let's start off with a quick side note, and that is that in today's video, there will be some M1903 experimental footage. However, most of the footage in today's video will not be from the weapon. Why? Well, as the stats and the later discussion on the weapon will show, this is probably the worst weapon in Battlefield 1, short maybe of course of trying to use the Colibri as primary weapon. That of course, however, is a troll pistol and not a serious primary weapon. The M1903 experimental, at least supposedly as primary weapon, you would expect to be a serious choice for an individual on the battlefield. With that being said, however, let's get straight into these stats. The M1903 experimental has a maximum damage of 26.5 and a minimum damage of 13.5. This gives it a 4-shot kill all the way out to 16 meters, and eventually from 35 meters onwards, you are actually going to require 8 bullets in the chest of your enemy to down them. Now, the pea shooter like damage model does come somewhat to compensate for it with a very high fire rate. At 359 rounds per minute, it is equal to that found on the auto-loading 8.25 and 3.5, and thus quite competitive. However, when you take the fire rate and the damage it does and look at the time to kill, you'll soon notice that this weapon is pretty much beat by most of the weaponry in the game at any given distance. For a matter of fact, it's got the same time to kill in close quarters, that is to say up until 16 meters, as the Huet low weight. Not something you would consider a close quarter weapon. Another thing you should note here is that the M1903 Experimental is obviously not an automatic firing weapon, which in close quarters can make it a little bit more difficult. However, beyond those 60 meters, beyond its 4-shot kill range, its time to kill is worse than most of the weapons in the game, independent of whether they're actually specialized in that specific engagement distance. Moving on, however, from the damage output, muzzle velocity at 400 meters is very slow. However, given this weapon's extreme close quarter focus, this shouldn't be too much of a difficulty in using this weapon. What it does have is an extremely large magazine size. At 41 bullets, you really shouldn't have any trouble downing an entire squad of enemies before even thinking about reloading. Once you do, however, have to reload, don't worry too much. That won't take you a lot of time. At 2.25 seconds for the short reload and 3 seconds for the long reload, this gun, despite its large magazine size, is reloaded in a very speedy fashion. Next up then we have recoil, and this is to a certain extent one of the strengths of this weapon. Its vertical recoil is low at 0.28. What truly makes this weapon shine in the recoil department, however, is the left and right horizontal recoil at 0.1. Essentially, there is practically no horizontal recoil. Furthermore, then we have spread, very good on this weapon with a base spread of 0.21, an ADS while moving at 0.79, and a spread increase per shot of only 0.07. This weapon, technically speaking, is quite accurate. However, it's not that good at hip firing. Hip firing, standing and moving, while certainly not the worst in the category of weapons we're looking at 2.668, isn't really something that you're going to want to reliably use at anything but extreme close quarters. Having talked about the stats, then there's a couple of other things I'd like to mention about this weapon before we move into how to best use it, and that is specifically the iron sights of it. These are probably one of the, if not the worst iron sights I have found in Battlefield 1. I find it extremely difficult to actually use the iron sights when acquiring targets because of the engagement distance you are using this weapon if you're trying to be effective with it. In close quarter situations, you're coming up against players, most of which will be running the Automatico if you're on PC, that are going to be engaging a little bit of AD-AD spam. They're certainly going to be strafing and not standing still, unless of course you flank them, in which case you could be using the Colibri and you'd still be able to take out your target. In those situations, it can be extremely difficult to actually keep your crosshair, keep your reticle, keep that iron sight on target when your target is moving because of the large housing. Now, this may just apply to me personally, and I just simply have trouble using such an iron sight in close quarter, but I've got a feeling that most players actually will struggle to use this weapon even in its ideal close quarter scenario. Now this leads us nicely into the ideal usage, the associated playstyle that comes with the M1903 experimental. It is extreme close quarter. You're going to want to be within your 4-shot kill range. Frankly, if you really want to have a decent chance and win firefights consistently, you're actually going to want to avoid direct engagements. That means flanking people whenever possible, trying to come up from behind. Yes, you could equally use your pistol in the scenario to take out your target, but this weapon simply has such a poor damage output compared to the many close quarter strong weapons that you will encounter at these distances that you have very little choice. I like comparing this weapon to, for example, the autoloading 8.25. The weapon plays in a similar manner. Yes, the autoloading 8.25 has a little bit more recoil. However, for the close quarter scenarios, that doesn't really matter. It has a smaller magazine, but nevertheless is capable of taking out plentiful targets before having to reload, somewhere between 3 and 5. It has a better mother velocity and a much better time to kill, with a time to kill in close quarters, that is to say right at 2 meters, of 335 milliseconds. That's theoretical, of course, with 100% accuracy. The M1903 has a time to kill at this distance of 506 milliseconds. Nothing to laugh at. That is simply awful for a time to kill for a close quarter focused weapon. This is not a weapon that is to be used at long range because, of course, of its very poor bullets to kill at longer range, let alone the iron sights, making it even more difficult to actually use this weapon at longer ranges. So if you want to use this weapon, stick to extreme close quarters, try to flank, and where possible use your hip fire, at least in my opinion, because the iron sights really are very difficult to use against an individual strafing back and forward with a shotgun or with an automatic, or frankly any of the close or medium range weapons really have a better time to kill than you do in pretty much any given scenario. And this, in my opinion, is actually quite sad. The M1903 experimental could have been a very interesting weapon, a weapon that gave the scout class not only an aggressive bolt action rifle, but a weapon they could truly use in close quarters in combination with their flare to get up right on the objectives, run along the close quarter orientated support players, close quarter orientated medic players, and of course the great number of swarming assault players to help out and provide team support in a very different fashion. Furthermore, the weapon is an extremely interesting one. For a matter of fact, because of course it is a conversion of the M1903, if you actually go along with K bullets, you can convert this weapon on the fly back into essentially a sniper rifle for the 5 rounds of K bullets that you have, which is fantastically interesting to watch your soldier actually go through the animation of essentially reassembling the weapon. It's a very unique weapon, very interesting, but sadly it seems to have gotten absolutely no love in the stat department. And from my point of view, of all the weapons I have reviewed on this channel up until this day, of course not considering the Colibri, it is sadly by a long shot the worst weapon. That aside though, I'd like to know what you think about the M1903 experimental. Lover or hater? Do you use it or do you stay away from it? Have you even ever given it a try? Also, feel free to leave down your video suggestions in the comments below. If you found the video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.